The day I found out my family had been planning to betray me, I was standing in a hallway holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't suspicious. I was just walking from the back office to the kitchen in the building we all shared. The building my grandfather built, the building I'd worked in since I was 22 years old, and I heard my mother's voice through a door that hadn't fully latched. She wasn't whispering. Why would she? She thought I'd left for the day. He doesn't need to know until we're ready. Marcus already signed his copies. The accountant said it'll be clean by Q3. I stood there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He'll make noise, but what can he do? His name isn't on the revised operating agreement. Hasn't been for 2 years. I set the coffee cup down on the floor, slowly, quietly. And I walked back to my office, closed the door, sat down at my desk, and didn't mind why, and did not cry, did not call anyone, did not react. I just sat there and understood that everything I thought was real had been a performance. That was November 14th. I remember the exact date because I wrote it down that night. The first entry in what became a 200-page document that would eventually walk into a courtroom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am first, and then I'll tell you exactly what they did. My name isn't important. What's important is what I built and what was taken. I'm 36 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia. I have a daughter named Ray who is 8, and for the last 12 years, I have been the operational backbone of a family business called Hargrove Property Group, a mid-sized real estate management company my grandfather, Earl Hargrove, started in 1987. We manage residential rental properties. At our peak, we were managing 140 units across 4 counties. Nothing enormous, but nothing small either. My grandfather built it with 2 trucks, a phone book, and the kind of stubbornness that skips generations. He tried to give it to my father. My father drank it toward the ground before I was 15. So my grandfather looked at me, the oldest grandchild, the one who actually showed up, and said, "You want to learn this business or not?" I said yes. I meant it. By the time I was 25, I was handling vendor contracts, tenant disputes, maintenance scheduling, and quarterly reporting. My grandfather paid me fairly, $74,000 a year plus a 10% stake in the LLC, documented in a 2011 operating agreement that I had signed and notarized and filed and kept a copy of in a fireproof box under my bed. My grandfather trusted me. I trusted my grandfather. The problem was everyone else. My mother, Diane, came back into the business in 2016 when my grandfather had his first minor stroke. She'd been adjacent to it for years, showing up at holiday dinners, calling herself a co-founder at parties, but she'd never actually worked there. Not really. Not the way I worked there, but when Earl got sick, she stepped in, and she brought my brother Marcus with her. Marcus is 4 years younger than me. Smart in a specific, dangerous way. The kind of smart that's really just charm wearing a collared shirt. He'd bounced through 3 jobs in 5 years: pharmaceutical sales, insurance, something vague involving consulting. None of it stuck, but he could talk to anyone, close anyone, make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. My mother always said he had the gift. What she meant was, he could lie with a smile and people thanked him for it. I didn't dislike Marcus. That's the part I have to be honest about. I genuinely loved my brother. I used to cover for him when he was late, brought him into meetings, showed him how to read a property report. I handed him the tools. Later, I would learn exactly what he used them for. The first time something felt wrong, I almost ignored it. It was March of the previous year, 8 months before that hallway. I was pulling together our Q1 financials to send to our CPA, a man named Gerald Finch, who'd done our books for 9 years. Routine. I'd done it maybe 40 times. Except this time, one of the expense line items didn't match. A vendor called Prestige Maintenance Solutions had been paid $4,200 in January and another $3,800 in February. I didn't recognize the name. We had 3 regular maintenance contractors I'd worked with for years. I knew their invoices, their billing cycles, their rates. This wasn't one of them. I went to Marcus since he'd taken over vendor coordination the previous fall. "Oh, that's a new guy," he said. Didn't look up from his laptop. "Earl approved it. I'll send you the contact info." He never sent it. I noted it. I didn't push. I moved on. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the first one. I trusted that there was an explanation. I trusted that my family, whatever their flaws, wouldn't steal from me. 14 days later, I got a FedEx envelope on my desk. It was addressed to the business, standard stuff, except it had been opened and retaped. Badly. And inside was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Caldwell and Thorne, attorneys at law, Augusta, Georgia. The letter referenced a pending amendment to the Hargrove Property Group operating agreement and asked for a response by April 3rd. I wasn't copied on the amendment. My stomach dropped. I called Gerald Finch that afternoon. I asked him casually if he'd heard anything about changes to our operating structure. There was a pause on his end, just a half second too long. "I'd talk to your family about that," he said. "Above my pay grade." He'd done our books for 9 years. He'd never said anything was above his pay grade. I hung up. I sat very still. I thought about my grandfather at 79 years old, recovering from his second stroke in 14 months, living in a house on Whitaker Street that I visited every Sunday. And I thought, someone is moving fast, which means I need to move faster. I wasn't panicking. I want you to understand that. I was calculating. That night, I drove to Whitaker Street. My grandfather was in the sitting room, the news on low, a glass of sweet tea on the side table. He looked tired in the way old men look tired. Not sick, just worn down by time. I sat across from him and I said, "Granddad, has anyone asked you to sign anything recently?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Your mother brought some papers last month," he said. "Said it was routine, reorganizing for tax purposes. Did you read them?" He was quiet. "She said Gerald had looked them over." Gerald, who had just told me this was above his pay grade. I reached over and held my grandfather's hand. I kept my voice completely steady. "Okay," I said. "Don't sign anything else without calling me first. Promise me." He promised. I drove home. I put Ray to bed. I waited until the house was quiet. Then I opened my laptop and started pulling 12 years of financial records. I wasn't passive, I was building. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over you when you realize the people you love have been lying to you. It's not once, not impulsively, but deliberately for years. It's not loud grief. It's not hot anger. It's cold, surgical. Like something in your chest just recalibrates. That's where I was the night I opened those records. Sitting at my kitchen table at 11:43 p.m., Ray asleep down the hall, a glass of water I never touched, 12 years of files loading on my screen. I wasn't looking for anything specific yet. I was looking for the shape of it, the pattern. Because if they were moving money, they weren't doing it messily. Marcus was too smart for mess. My mother was too careful. Whatever they'd built it slowly, and that meant there were layers. I started with what I knew. The Hargrove Property Group operated through a business checking account at Coastal Heritage Bank, account ending in 4471. I had full access. I'd had full access for 9 years. I pulled every statement going back to January of 2 years prior and exported them into a spreadsheet. Then I pulled the vendor log I maintained separately, or make it a personal habit my grandfather had drilled into me. "Always keep your own copy," he used to say. "Don't trust one filing cabinet." I cross-referenced every payment over $500 against my vendor log. Prestige Maintenance Solutions appeared 22 times in 23 months. Total paid out, $89,400. I had no contract for them, no signed agreement, no insurance certificate, which every vendor we used was required to carry, no address on file, just a name and a bank routing number. I searched the Georgia Secretary of State's business registry. Prestige Maintenance Solutions was registered as an LLC in February, exactly 1 month before the first payment went out. Registered agent, a name I didn't recognize. Tyler Boone. Address, a UPS store on Abercorn Street in Savannah. I wrote it all down in a plain black notebook I'd bought at a CVS on the way home that evening. First entry, November 14th. The call. The name, Marcus. Q3. Revised operating agreement. Second entry, Prestige Maintenance Solutions. 22 payments, $89,400. Registered February. Tyler Boone. UPS store. Third entry, underlined twice. Gerald Finch knew. I want to be honest about something. During those first 2 weeks, there were moments I almost talked myself out of it because this was my family. My mother made me soup when I had Ray. My brother helped me move apartments twice. These were real things, real memories. And there's a specific cruelty in having to hold those memories next to spreadsheet evidence and choose which one is telling you the truth. But then I'd think about that phone call, the tone of my mother's voice. Not guilty, not conflicted, practical. Like she was discussing inventory. He'll make noise, but what can he do? That kept me moving. By the end of week 2, I had a system. Every morning before anyone else arrived at the office, I came in at 6:45 a.m. I made coffee. I walked through the building like I always had, and I photographed quietly, quickly, anything on desks, in open binders, in the communal filing cabinet that sat in the hallway outside Marcus's office. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't breaking locks or going through drawers. I was photographing what was already visible, what was left out, what people leave out when they think they're safe. On the third morning, I found a printed email chain on the corner of Marcus's desk. It hadn't been filed away, just sitting there under a coffee mug. The chain was between Marcus and someone named D. Thorne. And yes, I recognize that last name. Caldwell and Thorne, the law firm on that FedEx letter. The most recent email, dated October 28th, 2.5 weeks before the hallway, read, "The amendment is clean. Earl's signature is on file. We recommend moving forward with the capital reallocation before year end. The 10% restructure will hold." The 10% restructure. My 10% stake. The one in the 2011 operating agreement. The one in the fireproof box under my bed. They were restructuring it away. I photographed the email. I put the paper back exactly as I found it, at the same angle under the same mug. I walked to the kitchen, poured my coffee, and said good morning to our property coordinator, Linda, when she came in at 7:30. I was steady. I was smiling. Inside, I was calculating the cost of every year I'd given this company and what it would take to get it back. The next piece came from an unexpected place. My daughter Ray has a best friend named Poppy, and Poppy's mother, Claire, works as a paralegal at a civil litigation firm downtown. We weren't close friends. School pickup conversation, the occasional coffee. But I respected her. She was sharp, direct, the kind of woman who doesn't fill silence with noise. I ran into her at the Kroger on Skidaway Road on a Thursday afternoon. Ray and Poppy were arguing over cereal. Claire and I stood in the aisle and she asked how work was going. I almost said fine. Instead, and I don't know why, maybe because I was tired, maybe because I needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't inside the situation, I said, "Can I ask you something professional?" She looked at me carefully, nodded. If someone's name was removed from a business's operating agreement without their knowledge, and they'd been a documented stakeholder for over a decade, what would that be called? Claire didn't hesitate. Fraud, she said. Civil fraud, potentially criminal depending on how the signature was obtained. If they forged something, that's a felony. I nodded slowly. Is there an attorney you'd recommend? She pulled out her phone right there between the cereal boxes and texted me a name. Renata Cruz, Cruz and Holloway, LLP, she doesn't lose. That was the first time I smiled, genuinely smiled, in 2 weeks. I called Renata Cruz the following Monday morning at 9:02 a.m. from my car, parked 2 blocks from the office. Her assistant put me through in under 3 minutes. Renata herself picked up. Her voice was measured, unhurried, precise, the kind of voice that has delivered bad news to powerful people and watched them sit with it. I gave her the outline. 12 years, the LLC, the operating agreement, the prestige payments, the amended documents my grandfather had signed without understanding, the email from D. Thorne. When I finished, there was a short silence. How much documentation do you currently have? Enough to start, I said. I've been building for 2 weeks. Keep building, she said. Don't confront anyone. Don't move money. Don't let them know you know. Can you do that? I've been doing it, I said. Another short silence. I think she was deciding whether to believe me. Come in Wednesday at 3 p.m., she said. Bring everything. That Wednesday, I sat across from Renata Cruz in a 14th floor office with a view of the Savannah River and laid a folder on her desk containing 47 printed pages, bank statements, photographs, the Georgia LLC registration for Prestige Maintenance, the cross-referenced vendor log, and a written timeline I'd constructed the night before. She read in silence. All of it. I sat there for 22 minutes and said nothing. When she looked up, her expression hadn't changed, but she uncapped her pen. I'm going to refer you to a forensic accountant named David Oz. He works exclusively with fraud cases. Don't use your family's CPA anymore. Not for anything. I nodded. I also want you to start keeping a dated log of every interaction you have with your mother, your brother, anyone connected to this business. Every phone call, every text, every conversation. Time, date, who said what. I already started one, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Good, she said. Then let's talk about what they've actually taken from you. She turned to page 3 of my documents, the Prestige payment log, and tapped it with her pen. This is just what you've found so far, she said. If they built a ghost vendor this cleanly, I'd expect there's more. There's almost always more. She was right. I just didn't know yet how much more there was. I went home that night and sat with Ray while she did her homework. She was working on a worksheet about families, Kushna, who lives in your house, who takes care of you, who you can trust. She looked up at me and said, Mama, who do you trust? Kids ask things like that and don't know they've just put a knife in the room. I smoothed her hair back and said, You and Granddad Earl. She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her worksheet. I stared at the wall and thought about my grandfather's face the night I asked him about the papers. The way he'd said, she said it was routine. The complete absence of suspicion in his voice. Not because he was naive, but because he was 80 years old and his daughter had brought him papers and he'd trusted her. They used a dying man's signature. That was the moment I stopped feeling conflicted. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. This ends on my terms. There's a moment in every investigation. And I know that word sounds dramatic, but that's what it was. Where the thing you're looking for stops being a suspicion and becomes a fact. It lands differently than you expect. You think you'll feel vindicated, righteous, maybe even relieved that you weren't imagining it. What you actually feel is a specific, heavy grief. Because facts don't lie, and once you have them, you can't go back to the version of your life where you didn't. That moment came for me on a Tuesday morning in David Osei's office, 43 days after I first called Renata Cruz. David Osei worked out of a quiet suite on Drayton Street. No logo on the door, just a suite number. His assistant was a retired IRS auditor named Harriet who wore bifocals on a beaded chain and looked at financial documents the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray. David himself was methodical in a way that almost felt slow until you realized he hadn't missed a single thing. He was in his mid-50s, former federal financial crimes unit, now private. Renata had warned me. He's expensive and he's thorough. You want both. His rate was $340 an hour. I paid it without blinking. I'd spent 12 years building something. I wasn't going to lose it over an accountant's fee. In our first meeting, I handed him everything I had, the bank statements, the Prestige vendor records, the operating agreement from 2011, and a copy of the amended agreement that Renata had formally requested through legal channels. The amended one that removed my 10% stake. The one my grandfather had signed in September, believing it was routine tax restructuring. David spent 3 weeks pulling records I couldn't access myself, filed tax documents, state registration filings, registered agent histories, legal methods, all of it. Slow, careful. Then he called me in. I sat across from him on that Tuesday morning. Harriet set a coffee in front of me without asking. David opened a folder and turned it to face me. I'm going to walk you through what I found, he said. I need you to hold your reactions until I finish. All of them. I nodded. He started with Prestige Maintenance Solutions. I already knew about the $89,400. What I didn't know was that Prestige had a sister company Coastal Pro Services LLC, registered 8 months later. Different agent name, different UPS store address, same routing bank. Coastal Pro Services had received $114,200 from Hargrove Property Group over 19 months. Combined with Prestige, $203,600 paid to two ghost vendors that existed on paper and nowhere else. I kept my face still. David turned to the next page. The registered agent on Coastal Pro Services, he said, is listed as a Tyler Boone, same name as Prestige. But the bank account receiving payments from both entities traces back to a personal checking account at First National Bank of Georgia. He slid a page toward me. Account details. A name. Marcus Dwayne Hargrove. My brother's full name on a bank statement. Receiving wire transfers from two companies he'd created, funded entirely by the business I'd spent 12 years building. $203,600. I picked up my coffee. I set it back down. Keep going, I said. David turned to the third section of the folder. This was the part I hadn't seen coming. The part that, even now, even after everything, still makes me go quiet when I think about it. In reviewing the operating agreement amendment, David had flagged something to an independent handwriting specialist he occasionally worked with. A woman named Patricia Nguyen, certified forensic document examiner, 20 years of court testimony. Patricia had compared my grandfather's signature on the amended agreement to 12 other verified signatures on file, checks, property deeds, previous agreements going back to 2009. Her conclusion, delivered in a 4-page written report: the signature on the September operating agreement amendment presents significant inconsistencies with verified exemplars. Pen pressure, letter formation, and baseline alignment are inconsistent with the subject's established signing pattern. It is the opinion of this examiner that the questioned signature was not produced by Earl Hargrove. Not produced by Earl Hargrove. My grandfather hadn't signed it. Someone had signed his name. I put the paper down on the desk slowly, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what your hands might do if they're not occupied. Who? I asked. We can't prove authorship from the document alone, David said carefully. That's law enforcement's job if it gets there. What we can prove is that the signature is not his. I thought about my mother's voice in that hallway. Marcus already signed his copies. I thought about a woman in a camel coat bringing papers to an old man's house and telling him it was routine. I thought about the fact that my grandfather, who had built everything, who had trusted his family, who had looked at me at 22 and said, "Do you want to learn this business?" had been used, forged, discarded. He was 79 years old and recovering from his second stroke, and they had put a pen to paper and written his name like he was already gone. What's the legal term? I said quietly. For forging a signature on a legal document to transfer ownership of an asset? David looked at me steadily. In Georgia, that's felony forgery in the first degree, and he said, it's also civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on your grandfather's cognitive status at the time, potential elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. They had financially abused my grandfather to steal from me. I sat with that for a long moment. The office was very quiet. Harriet was in the next room. The river was somewhere beyond the window. Okay, I said, what do we do next? What we did next was build the case so thoroughly that by the time it ever saw a courtroom, there would be no cracks to argue through. Renata filed a formal evidence preservation request, which legally required Hargrove Property Group to retain all financial records, communications, and documents. This was important because it meant Marcus and my mother couldn't shred anything without adding obstruction to their problems. David continued pulling records. What emerged over the following 2 weeks was a complete financial picture. And it was worse than I'd calculated. Beyond the ghost vendors, Marcus had been drawing a salary from the business under a secondary employee classification, listed in payroll records as a senior operations consultant. This was in addition to his regular salary as co-manager. The secondary salary had been running for 4 years. Total drawn, $137,500. Combined with the ghost vendor payments, $341,100 extracted from Hargrove Property Group, a company in which I held a 10% documented stake. Without my knowledge, without board approval, and without any legitimate business purpose. $341,000. I wrote it in my notebook in large numbers and stared at it for a long time. There was one more thing, a smaller thing maybe, but the one that stayed with me longest. In reviewing communications David had legally obtained through our formal discovery process, there was an email thread between Marcus and my mother dated 14 months earlier, almost a full year before that hallway moment. The subject line was Timeline for HG Transition. In it, my mother wrote, "We need to move before Earl gets worse. If he loses capacity officially, it complicates everything. We have a window," Marcus replied. Agreed. What about my name? My mother's response was 4 words. He'll be handled separately. He'll be handled separately. I read that email 3 times. I printed it. I put it in the folder. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every birthday, every time my mother hugged me at a family gathering and said she was proud of me. I thought about all the years I showed up early, stayed late, covered for people, believed in this family like it was something solid. And I understood that while I was doing all of that, while I was being a son, a brother, an employee, a believer, they were in a room somewhere deciding how to handle me. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I was done. There's a difference. Anger is loud and it makes mistakes. Done is quiet and it finishes things. I called Renata that evening at 6:15 p.m. "I have everything," I said. "How do you want to proceed?" she asked. I thought about my grandfather on Whitaker Street. I thought about Ray doing her homework. I thought about 12 years of early mornings and vendor calls and quarterly reports and a fireproof box under my bed. "I want everything back," I said, "and I want consequences." Renata was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Then let's give them a chance to do the wrong thing one more time," she said. I didn't understand what she meant yet. I would, very soon. There's a specific kind of confidence that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't know, you know. It's not arrogance. It's not superiority. It's just stillness, a complete absence of the need to perform. You stop faking reactions because you don't need to anymore. You stop filling silences because silence has become your most useful tool. For 3 weeks after my call with Renata, I went to work every morning like nothing had changed. I said good morning to Marcus. I asked my mother about her weekend. I sat in Tuesday operations meetings and took notes and nodded at the right moments. And every single day, I was a different person than they thought I was. Renata's strategy was specific, and I want to explain it carefully because this is the part where being smart matters more than being right. She did not want to file immediately. "If we file first," she told me in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, "they lawyer up, they freeze, and everything becomes a negotiation. We might win on paper and spend 4 years doing it." She leaned forward. "But if we let them make the next move, if we let them call the meeting they've been planning, they walk in thinking they control the room, and we walk in having already won." "What meeting?" I asked. "They're going to call one," she said simply. "They've moved the money, they've amended the agreement, they've restructured the LLC. The only thing left on their checklist is telling you, formally, so it's on record that you were informed and given a chance to accept a buyout." She was right. I knew she was right the moment she said it. They needed the meeting for legal cover, a documented offer, a paper trail that showed they'd been fair. "So we let them call it," I said. "We let them call it. We show up, and we bring the 67 pages." The call came on a Thursday. Marcus, casual, warm, that specific warmth he deployed like a tool. "Hey, we were thinking of doing a family sit-down about the business. Get everyone aligned going into Q1. Mom wants to do it at the house. Sunday, maybe 11? "Sure," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "No, no, just yourself." I hung up and texted Renata 1 word. "Sunday." She replied in under a minute. "Perfect. I'll have David's summary formatted. Wear something you're comfortable in. This will take a while. I need to tell you about the Saturday before." I drove to Whitaker Street. My grandfather was in better shape than he'd been in months, sitting up straight, color in his face, a crossword on his lap. We sat on the back porch for 2 hours. I brought him peach sweet tea from the place on Bull Street that he liked. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. He was still recovering, and Renata had advised me to keep him out of the immediate confrontation. His deposition, if it came to that, needed to be untainted by my version of events. But I told him enough. I told him that some things had happened with the business that weren't right, and that I had people helping me fix it, and that I needed him to know that I had not walked away and I was not going to walk away. He looked at me for a long time. Did they use my name? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly. He looked out at the yard, the oak tree he'd planted 30 years ago, the garden my grandmother had kept before she passed. He was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, You finish it. 2 words. No anger in his voice. Just wait. I will, I said. I drove home and didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, because I was ready. And readiness has its own particular energy that doesn't let you rest. Sunday came gray and cool. November in Savannah has a specific quality. Not quite cold, not quite warm. The light coming in flat and honest through bare branches. I dressed carefully. Dark slacks, a burgundy blouse, my grandmother's small gold earrings. I looked like someone who had come to handle business. Because I had. Renata met me in the driveway of my mother's house on Habersham Street at 10:48 a.m. She was in a charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, a leather document case under her arm. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who had done this before and was not impressed by any of it. Beside her was David Osei, carrying a second case. I'd told my mother I was coming alone. I had not technically lied. I'd just declined to mention my guests. We walked to the door together. I rang the bell. My mother answered. She saw me, started to smile, and then saw Renata, then David. The smile didn't disappear exactly, it just froze. I brought my attorney, I said pleasantly. I hope that's okay. It was not okay. I could see that clearly. But there was nothing she could say in the doorway that wouldn't make things worse for her, and she knew it. She stepped back and let us in. Marcus was in the living room. He was wearing a quarter-zip sweater and holding coffee. And when he saw Renata, his jaw tightened in a way he couldn't fully control. Just for a second. But I saw it. There was one other person in the room. A man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, ill-fitting suit. He stood up when we entered. This is Howard Pell, my mother said carefully. He's been advising us on the business restructuring. Renata looked at Howard Pell with the specific expression of someone who has already read everything Howard Pell has ever filed. Mr. Pell, she said. I'm Renata Cruz and Holloway. I represent the interests of my client as a documented stakeholder and founding era partner in Hargrove Property Group. Howard Pell blinked twice. He sat back down. We all sat. The room was quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone is recalibrating. My mother looked at me, and for just a moment, beneath the composure, I saw something flicker. Not guilt, not quite. More like the look of someone who has just realized the board is not arranged the way they thought it was. We called this meeting, Marcus started, his voice smooth and practiced, to discuss the future direction of Hargrove Property Group and to make sure everyone feels. Before we proceed, Renata said, setting her document case on the coffee table and opening it, I'd like to enter a few items into the record of this conversation. She placed the first document on the table, the Prestige Maintenance Solutions Payment Log, 22 payments, $89,400. Marcus stopped talking. She placed the second document, Coastal Pro Services, 19 payments, $114,200. The room was very still. Third document, the bank records, Marcus Dwayne Hargrove's personal account, wire transfers, dates, amounts. My mother's hand, resting on her knee, went tight. Fourth document, the payroll records showing the ghost salary, 4 years, $137,500. Howard Pell picked up one of the documents and read it. He set it back down carefully. He did not look at Marcus. Fifth document, Patricia Nguyen's handwriting analysis report, the conclusion paragraph facing up. The questioned signature was not produced by Earl Hargrove. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Marcus looked at me, and I want to be precise about what I saw in his face. It wasn't rage, it wasn't defiance. It was the specific, collapsing expression of someone who has just understood that the exit they planned is no longer there. My mother said very quietly, "Where did you get these?" "Legally," Renata said. "Every document in this file was obtained through legally available channels, formal discovery requests, and licensed professional analysis." She paused. "We have copies filed with my office, David Osei's office, and stored in 3 separate secure locations." She let that land. "Now," she said, "I believe you called this meeting to present my client with a buyout offer. I'd like to hear it." Howard Pell leaned over and whispered something to Marcus. Marcus nodded. He'd gone very still, that specific stillness of someone performing calm they don't feel. "We were thinking," Marcus said, "given the restructuring, a fair buyout of your stake would be in the range of $80,000. 80,000 for a 10% stake in a company managing 140 units. For 12 years. For everything I'd built." I looked at Renata. She almost smiled. Almost. "My client will not be accepting a buyout," she said. "My client will be pursuing full restoration of her documented ownership stake, repayment of all fraudulently extracted funds totaling $341,100, damages for the forged operating agreement amendment, and we will be filing a report with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation regarding the potential elder financial abuse of Earl Hargrove." Howard Pell stood up. "Now, wait you're welcome to wait," Renata said. "But I'd suggest you advise your clients that the window for a cooperative resolution is currently open and will not remain so." My mother looked at me, really looked at me, and I believe, that was the first moment she understood that the person sitting across from her was not the person she'd planned to handle. I looked back at her steadily. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We were in that house for 2 hours and 19 minutes. By the time we left, Howard Pell had asked for a 2-week recess to consult with his clients. Renata had handed him a formal letter of intent. Marcus had not said a full sentence in the last 40 minutes. My mother had asked twice if there was any way to keep this within the family. Renata's answer both times was gentle and immovable. That window closed when the first wire transfer cleared. Walking to our cars in the driveway, the gray November light thin and flat around us, David said something quietly to Renata that I didn't catch. She nodded. I stood by my car for a moment. 12 years. $341,000. A forged signature on a dying man's document. 4 words in an email. He'll be handled separately. Written about me by my own mother. I thought about being 22 years old, walking into my grandfather's office, saying, "Yes, I want to learn this business." I thought about every early morning, every late night, every problem I solved and every crisis I managed, and every time I told myself this was worth it because it was family. I exhaled. Then I got in my car, picked up Ray from her friend Poppy's house, took her for waffles at the place on Waters Avenue she loved, and listened to her talk for 45 minutes about something that happened at school that I have genuinely forgotten because I was just so grateful to be sitting across from her in an ordinary booth, in an ordinary Saturday afternoon on the right side of something. The 2 weeks Howard Pell asked for became 3. Renata was not surprised. "They're looking for a crack," she told me over the phone on a Wednesday evening. "Something they can use to reduce exposure. They won't find one, but they need to feel like they looked." I had stopped going into the Hargrove Property Group office by then. Renata had advised it, not because I was required to stay away, but because my presence created opportunities for confrontation that could complicate the legal process. I worked remotely. I responded to emails professionally and briefly. I did not engage with Marcus beyond operational necessity. He texted me once, 11 days after the meeting. "Can we talk? Just us, no lawyers." I showed the text to Renata. She drafted a 3-sentence reply that was so politely immovable it almost sounded warm. I sent it word for word. He didn't text again. On the 19th day, Howard Pell called Renata with a settlement offer. She called me immediately after and read it to me over the phone. her voice carrying the specific neutrality of someone presenting information they already have an opinion about. The offer: $180,000. Restoration of my 10% stake in the LLC. A signed agreement that no further legal action would be pursued by either party. A non disclosure clause. Renata paused after reading it. Your thoughts? She asked. What are yours, Mar? I said, they've conceded the stake restoration, which tells you they know the forgery case is solid. The $180,000 is less than half of documented fraud. The NDA is them buying silence. Another pause. We can do better, significantly better, but it will take longer and it will get public. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about my grandfather on his back porch. You finish it. Counter, I said. Renata's counter was precise and non-negotiable in the ways that mattered. Full repayment of the $341,100 in fraudulently extracted funds, restoration of the 10% stake, a formal acknowledgement, signed and notarized, that the operating agreement amendment had been executed without the informed consent of Earl Hargrove. Payment of my legal and forensic accounting fees, which had reached $47,300. And no NDA. Howard Pell called back within 48 hours. They rejected the no NDA term. They rejected the formal acknowledgement. Then we file, Renata said. We filed on a Thursday morning in Franklin County Superior Court. Civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment, and a separate referral letter, filed the same day, to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit regarding potential elder financial abuse of Earl Hargrove, age 79. The GBI referral was Renata's idea. She explained it to me carefully. The civil case recovers your money. The GBI referral creates consequences that money can't fix. It also, she said, tends to accelerate cooperative behavior in people who previously felt protected. She was right about that, too. The acceleration came from an unexpected direction. Hargrove Property Group was not a public company, but it had a local presence. 140 units, longtime tenant relationships, vendor contracts, a name that had existed in Savannah for 37 years. When the civil filing became public record, a business reporter at the Savannah Morning News named Daniel Farrow picked it up. I didn't call Daniel Farrow. I want to be clear about that. I did not go looking for press coverage, but Renata had told me when we filed, public record is public record. We don't control what journalists do with it. Daniel Farrow called Renata's office for comment. She gave him a one-paragraph statement. Factual, measured, no editorializing. She did not call Marcus or my mother for their side of it. That was Daniel's job. The story ran on a Tuesday. It was not front page. It was not dramatic. It was a clean, factual piece about a civil fraud filing involving a local real estate management company, a disputed operating agreement, and a GBI referral involving an elderly company founder. It was enough. Within 72 hours of that story running, Howard Pell called Renata and asked to schedule a mediation. The mediation took place on a Friday in January at a neutral office on Oglethorpe Avenue. A retired judge named Harold Sims presided. He was in his late 60s, unhurried with the particular patience of someone who has watched a lot of people sit across from each other with grievances and money. Marcus came with Howard Pell. My mother came with a second attorney she'd hired separately, a woman named Gail Torrance, who spent most of the session reading documents and saying little. I came with Renata. David Osei attended by phone, available for financial clarification if needed. The session lasted 4 hours and 40 minutes. I won't walk you through every exchange because a lot of it was procedural and repetitive in the way legal processes are. But I'll tell you the moments that mattered. At the 90-minute mark, Harold Sims looked at Marcus directly and asked him to explain, in plain language, the business purpose of Prestige Maintenance Solutions. Marcus looked at Howard Pell. Howard Pell looked at his notes. The silence lasted long enough that Harold Sims wrote something down. At the 3-hour mark, my mother asked, through Gail Torrance, whether the GBI referral could be withdrawn as part of any settlement. Renata said, the referral has been made to a government agency. It is no longer within my client's control to withdraw it. This was technically true and strategically perfect. At the 4 hour mark, Harold Sims called a 15-minute recess. When we came back, Howard Pell placed a revised settlement document on the table. The final settlement, $341,100. Full repayment of fraudulently extracted funds, structured as a combination of cash payment and asset transfer. Marcus liquidated a personal investment account at Edward Jones, $203,600. The remaining $137,500 was secured against a property my mother owned jointly, a rental house on Tybee Island she'd held for 11 years. Restoration of my 10% stake in Hargrove Property Group, documented in a corrected and re-executed operating agreement, signed by all parties in the presence of a notary. $47,300 in legal and forensic fees, paid in full within 30 days. A formal written acknowledgement? Not quite the full admission Renata had originally sought, but a document stating that the September operating agreement amendment had been executed in a manner that did not comply with the LLC's own operating procedures and was therefore void. No NDA. That last point was mine. Renata had told me the NDA was negotiable, and I could use it as a bargaining chip. Accept it in exchange for a higher settlement number. I told her I didn't want it. Why not? She asked, not challenging me, just clarifying. Because I didn't do anything wrong, I said. I'm not going to sign something that makes it look like I did. She nodded once and took it off the table. The GBI investigation moved on its own timeline, separate from the civil settlement. I was interviewed twice, once in February, once in March, by a financial crimes investigator named Agent Carla Webb. She was methodical and precise, and asked questions in the careful, circular way investigators do when they're building something they intend to be airtight. I gave her everything. David Osei provided his full forensic report. Patricia Nguyen provided her handwriting analysis. My grandfather gave a voluntary statement from his home on Whitaker Street, with his own attorney present, a man named Robert Chow, who Renata had recommended and who spent 3 hours with Earl before the interview, making sure he understood everything and was comfortable. My grandfather was sharp that day, clearer than he'd been in months, like he'd been waiting for the chance to set the record straight. His attorney told me afterward that Earl had asked at the end of the interview whether his company would survive. Agent Webb had said that wasn't her department. Earl had nodded and said, "Ask my granddaughter, she'll make sure of it." I cried when Robert Chow told me that. First time I'd cried through any of it. I'm not ashamed of that. The GBI concluded its investigation in late spring. I can't detail everything because certain elements remain part of an ongoing process. But what I can tell you is this. Marcus was formally charged with 2 counts of felony fraud and 1 count of elder financial abuse under Georgia Code 30-5-8. He entered a negotiated plea that included restitution, already covered by the civil settlement, and 3 years of probation with mandatory financial oversight. He is not permitted to serve as an officer or director of any Georgia LLC during his probation period. My mother was not criminally charged. The evidence supported her involvement in the planning, but the signature forgery could not be directly attributed to her, and prosecutors made a practical decision about where to focus. She was required, as part of the civil settlement's asset provision, to transfer the Tybee Island property. She did so in April. I have not spoken to my mother since the mediation. I don't know if I will. That's not a dramatic statement. It's just where I am. In May, 6 months after that Sunday meeting on Habersham Street, I incorporated a new company, Hargrove and Ray Property Management, LLC, named for my grandfather and my daughter. He thought that was funny and perfect in equal measure. He told me so from his chair on the back porch, with his sweet tea and his crossword and the oak tree behind him, and he laughed in the way old men laugh when something is exactly right. I took 4 of our longtime property owners with me, clients I'd personally managed for years who called me without any solicitation on my part when the civil filing became public. By July, I'd signed contracts on 31 units. By September, 48. I hired a property coordinator named Sylvia, who had worked for a competing firm for 6 years and was precisely as sharp as her resume suggested. I hired a part-time bookkeeper, I contracted with 3 maintenance vendors, all of them real, all of them verified, all of them with signed agreements and insurance certificates on file. I kept meticulous records. I always had. Now I kept them with a different feeling. Not defensiveness, not fear. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone who has learned, at significant cost, exactly what documentation is worth. Renata and I had a brief final meeting in August to close out the case file. She handed me a folder with everything in it: the settlement, the court filings, the GBI correspondence, David's forensic report. All of it organized, tabbed, complete. You were a good client, she said. That was high praise from Renata. I had learned to read her economy with words. You were the right attorney, I said. She almost smiled. Almost. At the door, I asked her, because I'd wondered since that first phone call, what made her take the case. She had plenty of work. This wasn't a case that would make the news in a big way. It wasn't the kind of thing that built a reputation. She thought about it for a moment. You'd already built the file before you called me, she said. Most people call when they're emotional and they haven't thought past the call. You called when you were ready? That told me everything I needed to know about how it would go. She shook my hand. I walked to the elevator. I want to tell you how it feels now, because I think that's what people actually want to know when they hear a story like this. Not just what happened, but what it did to the person it happened to. Here is the honest answer. Some mornings I drive Ray to school and I pass the building on Price Street where Hargrove Property Group is still operating. Smaller now, 3 of their best clients gone, a shadow of what it was. And I feel nothing in particular. Not satisfaction, not grief. Just the mild, distant recognition of something that used to be mine and isn't anymore. And that's all right. Some nights I think about my mother's voice in that hallway. He'll make noise. But what can he do? And I think about everything I did. And I feel something that isn't quite pride, but is adjacent to it. The feeling of having moved through something that was designed to flatten you and coming out still standing. I don't think about Marcus much. I find that I have less feeling about my brother than I expected. Maybe because the person I thought he was never existed. You can't really mourn someone who was always a performance. My grandfather is still on Whitaker Street, still doing crosswords, still drinking sweet tea. We have Sunday dinner together most weeks. Me, Ray, Earl, and sometimes Robert Chow's wife, who lives on the same block and has become quietly part of the orbit. Earl asks about the business every time. How many units? Which neighborhoods? What's coming? I tell him everything. He listens with the focused attention of someone who built something from nothing and knows what that listening is worth. Last Sunday, Ray climbed onto the arm of his chair. Something she's done since she was 4, a habit he pretends to find bothersome and clearly loves, and said, "Great Granddad, Mama named the company after us." Earl looked at me over her head. "I know," he said. "She did good." I stayed silent for years because I didn't know. And then I stayed silent for a few more months because I did know and I was building. There is a version of this story where I confront my family the day I heard that phone call, where I cry and accuse and demand and give them every opportunity to close ranks, destroy evidence, and manage the narrative. I chose a different version. I chose patience, documentation, the right people in the right order. I chose to let them feel safe right up until the moment they walked into that living room and saw what was on the coffee table. I don't think silence is always the right answer. I don't think waiting is always strength. But sometimes, when you know what you're dealing with, when the people across from you are calculating rather than impulsive, when the evidence needs time to become undeniable, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. Go home, open a notebook, and start writing down the truth. They plan to betray me. I plan to survive them. Only one of those plans worked.